log in, waiting to be let in. Just another normal school day. Connecting, disconnecting, reconnecting still. Uh-oh, I got the Zoom glue, but everybody else has it too, so not even special. Is it Monday or Friday or Wednesday or Sunday? Wait, I got that order right? I got it wrong. Did I? No, you got it wrong. October, December, September, November. You got that wrong too.
Am I still 12?
No, I don't know. Ma? Connecting, disconnecting, reconnecting still. Uh-oh, I got the Zoom boom. My grandma and my dog have it too. Yeah, so what's the point of talking about it? Hey guys, I got a headache. Back. Remember when we
Hi again, and a very good morning to all of you joining us at the Children in Lockdown Arts Festival 2021 for Day 2. Our panel discussion is about to begin shortly, but before I move on to the panel discussion, I would like to invite our festival director, Pyume Vijayasundara, to speak a few words.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of the Children in Lockdown Arts Festival. If you joined us yesterday, thank you for joining us. And if you missed anything yesterday, I just want to let you know that all the sessions are available on our YouTube channel, Stages Theatre Group, and you can also view the yesterday's sessions on our Facebook page. So I'd urge you to go get a little recap of yesterday as well. So something special about today is today's show is run by the kids. So we have in the morning our session on vulnerable children in the pandemic, and in the evening we have something you can all relate to, which is schooling during the pandemic. And most of the artworks today are done by groups of children, which essentially is the crux of the Children in Lockdown Arts Festival. So I urge you to join us. As I said yesterday as well, I know it's online and sometimes gets a little tedious, but I urge you to sit tight and watch. You'd be amazed when you hear the stories and watch them and see the kind of creative resilience that these children and artists have been showing us. And this is why the Children in Lockdown Arts Festival is a celebration of our creative resilience and humanity. So I would like to welcome you back to Day 2. And please stay tuned and watch us on www.stages.lk/live, on our Facebook page, Stages Theatre Group, or on our official YouTube channel. Enjoy the show.
Pyume, and thank you for putting this festival together for our children and for everyone who has logged in. It has been an eye-opening first day, and I'm sure the second day is going to bring you a lot of artwork and discussions that you will gain and relate to. Okay, moving on to our panel discussion. It is going to be on the vulnerable children in the pandemic. So the artwork we watched this morning took us through the perspective of three children, and their walks of life and their experiences that differed from each other. And I believe it brought us closer to the stories we may be distanced from. This is a reminder that there are vulnerable children on many levels, be it to socioeconomic issues or to gaps in policymaking. So how do we move forward? What steps do we take to ensure that these children receive the support that they deserve? To open this discussion, I welcome our moderator, Ms. Selvi Sachitanandan. Selvi is an architect, an urban planner, and the founder of Basic Income Sri Lanka and the Purnam Foundation. She has worked with the UN in Sri Lanka to provide relief and humanitarian support to those affected by the war. She is also a member of Wisdom Women, a community forum for women leaders, for whom she conducts regular panel discussions. So thank you for being with us today, Selvi, and I will pass on the mic to you now.
Hello, sorry about that. Good morning to all, one and all. I would really like to welcome all of you here today and my panelists who are here with me for this wonderful morning where we are going to look at the issues faced by vulnerable children. Due to the pandemic, not so much the pandemic, but the lockdowns. It is unprecedented and very, very difficult times for us. And we are here having an arts festival. One might ask, why a festival in difficult times? I remember a Facebook post which said, if you're thrown lemons, make lemonade. So we don't have much control over what's thrown at us. But it depends on all of us to do the best we can with it and make music out of it if we can. And I think this is what Ruanti Di Chiqueira and her team have done today. They have turned this difficult situation on its head and produced this art festival, but at the same time, highlighting the issues underlying all these problems. So congratulations, Ruanti and their team, for this effort. What is happening around is very, very extremely difficult situation, not just for people, the government, the health officials, but for the families and most importantly, the children. Unlike any previous episodes of pandemic or even epidemics, this is a global phenomena. Some say that this might even become the basis for a new world order or a grand reset. We are going through monumental changes. Changes in the way people relate to each other. Changes in the way how parents and children respond to each other. Changes in the way we look at money. I think that has changed a lot. And changes in the way we look at jobs and careers. How parents and children interact. How education has become technology-driven. How children are moving away from institutional settings and into their homes for education, for learning. How lockdowns have become part of our everyday life. If you had told me in 2019 that there is this thing like lockdown and that we will all be confined to our homes and our rooms, I would have said, and not just confined in our rooms, but the world, the earth, the planet will be closed for quarantine. I would have dismissed it at beyond belief. Scarcely credible was it at that time. But now, today, lockdowns have become part of our daily lives. Here we are, after the second global lockdown. Now we are looking at the fallout from the darkness that it subjected the world to. There was a massive impact on everyday social life and changes in the lives of all families. The sudden, unforeseen interruption of the usual routines brought uncertainty, crisis into daily life. What was most important is the fear, the paranoia that came with it. If you remember what the children were saying in Pillaihale Eluvir, they said, we were so scared to see the ambulances coming. Because the ambulances didn't come to save them their lives. It came with police, and it came with PHI, and it came with such a noise and sound that the children got scared. They associated that with fear. The negative impacts of lockdowns hit women and children hardest, especially the vulnerable children. Normally, when we talk about vulnerability, we talk about children who are prone to emotional and physical abuse. But vulnerability doesn't stop there. Children who are in the lower socioeconomic bracket, they are vulnerable too. And children who are racially discriminated. The children who are moving, children who are migrating, they're also vulnerable. But COVID-19 and the lockdowns have brought in another layer of vulnerability on top of all this. So what we find is that the vulnerability, the intensity, or the degree of vulnerability has increased. And not just that, the segment of children that come under vulnerability has also expanded. The numbers have increased, and the degree, the intensity has increased. So we have a much bigger problem at hand with vulnerability. So we're going to talk about this, and our panelists are going to deal with the different groups of vulnerable children. And for this, I would like to first call upon Ruki Fernando. He has been working with children who are migrant children. The vulnerabilities of children of migrant families, vulnerabilities associated with lockdowns, add another layer to them as well. Thus compounds the impact, adding to isolation, anxiety, stress, and mental distress. Irfan Sadiq's family was one such. His daughter, Isabel and Lucky, made a short film called Departure that traces their journey through seeking asylum and later being locked down. In order to expand on this topic, I turn to Ruki Fernando. Ruki is familiar with Irfan's family, the context of their arrival in Sri Lanka, the problems that confronted them after the Easter bombing, and the subsequent lockdown. Ruki Fernando is a human rights activist, writer, and educator. He works with survivors, victims' families, and affected communities in different parts of Sri Lanka. He also works with refugees and asylum seekers. May I call upon Ruki Fernando to give his views of migrant families in lockdowns. Thank you, Ruki.
Good morning to everyone. I'm happy to be here, and I was very what I saw this morning, particularly the production around the communities living in the hill country, and also the one by Isabel and Lucky, who I happen to know personally. I'll try to share a little bit things a bit beyond what was shared in that short film, particularly by Isabel and Lucky, but also try to connect with what I saw. This is also, although I knew the family reasonably well in the last couple of years, this was the first time I saw their production. So it had a very kind of a striking effect on me, even though I knew some of the stories behind it. So one of the things I think that came out at the beginning itself was that when they left their own place, left their home as such, the children probably didn't know what they were heading into. Sri Lanka is better known maybe in Pakistan as a cricket playing country, maybe for tourism, and children didn't know that they were actually coming here as asylum seekers and refugees. So the first departure itself, the name of the film is Departures. It's not something that children were kind of ready for what they were getting into. And that becomes very challenging, I think, when they actually arrive. Then they also had to depart within Sri Lanka. I would call, they became refugees again in Sri Lanka, within Sri Lanka, when they were compelled to go leave their house because of the Easter Sunday bombings. And I think in the short film, they mentioned that their house owner thought that they are responsible to some extent for this, and that is why they were asked to leave. And it's very difficult to imagine how hurting or how difficult that would have been for two children to be accused of being involved in such a horrendous act or tragedy that affected so many people. Not just the physical act of moving their house, but the impact the accusation will have on their mental health and well-being. And then, of course, finally, in I think a month or two ago, they had to leave Sri Lanka again, the third departure as such. So they also had to leave. Each departure also makes them leave a place of familiarity and forces them, compels them to adapt to something new, a new environment, new neighbors, and also to find new friends. They have to leave friends behind. And in their case, they also had to leave their elder sister behind at the beginning when they left Pakistan. Possibly even pets or anything that they liked in the neighborhood. Then something beyond what was in the very short film, that people who come like this to Sri Lanka, they are mostly fleeing persecution because of their religious belief or freedom, or their freedoms are affected in their own place of residence. The majority of them are from Pakistan, then from Afghanistan, but we do have people from about 12 countries, approximately around 1,000, including children. But their stay in Sri Lanka is temporary. Many Sri Lankans seem to think that their stay is permanent. That is not the case. And their stay is also legally sanctioned by the Sri Lankan government. The government has agreed through a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to allow them to stay temporarily in Sri Lanka. And the word temporary is actually not defined. So from people I know, there are some people who have been here for a few months and they leave after a few months. And then there are people I know who are still here after 9 years, from about 2012. So that's a very pretty broad kind of definition of temporary. And also, I think we can imagine the impact this will have on children. Temporary relocation from place to place will always make it difficult for children in their lives. But I also want to go a little bit beyond the children to the adults, because I think the adult circumstances and the lives will have a big impact on the quality of life of children. Now, in this case, Isabel and Lucky's father is someone that I got to know quite well in Sri Lanka, but we had also met before he came here. He was a theater artist himself. And he has been involved in working for peace, justice in his own country, Pakistan. But he found himself in very difficult circumstances here because he couldn't do what he was good at. And by extension, he couldn't contribute to society the way he was contributing in Pakistan. He didn't have opportunities to contribute. I think the only meaningful chance he had was to get involved in this theater production and through Ruanti and Piumi. Other than that, he had no ways of contributing to societies. So that had a big impact, I think, on his mental health well-being. And that would be passed on to children as well. The adults' mental health well-being will definitely have an impact on the children. And also it has a huge impact on the income, because they had no way of earning any income here. Because the Sri Lankan government doesn't allow these asylum seekers who come here temporarily to legitimately work anywhere. This compels some of them to work informally, and that opens up space for abuse. I have been told by some that they have done work and then they were not paid. They are compelled to work in very difficult, hazardous circumstances, and sometimes they don't even end up getting paid. So that's a very big challenge, and that lack of income directly affects the quality of their accommodation or housing. Many of them, like Isabel and Lucky, as a family live in like one room. So the living room, the dining room, the bedrooms, all are just one. The kitchen, all just one. And again, when there are teenage children, this is not a very healthy environment for a family to be in. But the circumstances, particularly the financial circumstances, compel them to be in that situation. And also something that directly affects children is that confined space in the lockdown. So children who have more spacious houses with a garden were able to better cope with the lockdown, being isolated and stuck inside a home for about several months actually. But children who are just stuck inside one room, where the living room, dining room, kitchen, bedrooms all are in that particular room, find it very, very difficult to cope. They find it difficult to learn, they find it difficult to play, and they find it difficult to find meaning and to grow in that kind of environment. And I think this has affected probably Isabel and Lucky, and broadly asylum seeker children, and broadly children who are stuck in very limited spaces like that. And this also affected their recreation. Their recreation, again due to lack of income, was not to go to a high-end restaurant or to a cinema, but it was rather go to a beach that was nearby in Mount Lavenia, Hivala, or it was to go to a park that was free of charge, or to interact with some children that they have got to know here, they are friends. But all that was taken away from them during the lockdown. So they couldn't afford to sit back and watch, I think, Netflix or some use that home cinemas or anything like that. So this disproportionately affected even their recreation. And also I think the overall the level of education was also affected, but this has been a problem even before COVID and lockdowns, because children who come as asylum seekers are not offered or not included in the free education system that Sri Lanka has prided itself on. So these children are not offered free education. UNHCR offers a few of them scholarships, but the vast majority of them don't get scholarships from UNHCR either. So unless the parents can afford, unless some well-wishers offer some contribution to enroll them in schools, they can't get education, or they have to settle for very, very low quality education that is on offer in the market as such. So this is something I think that children, asylum seeker children, are very greatly affected, and of course this got worse during the pandemic due to the lockdown. Like many Sri Lankan children from very disadvantaged, low-income communities, these children found it very difficult to participate in online education, because online education requires different devices which are expensive. Online education requires more data, internet, which is also expensive. And then there is also the stigma. No, I think there was at one point it was mentioned about Easter Sunday, but then also in terms of the pandemic also, at certain point in Sri Lanka, the Muslim community was blamed for that. And by extension, when the Muslim community was blamed, these asylum seekers and refugees who were perceived as being Muslim were also affected. I remember when I went to visit Isabel Lucky and their father during when a lockdown was lifted, I think early this year, if I remember, their house owner was very reluctant to allow me to go. So even the very limited number of friends and visitors that they've had to their own place to have a cup of tea, to have a chat, were restrained from going. And I didn't stay long, I just said hello, and very quickly I came back because I didn't want to create any kind of bad feeling between the house owner and this family. Although I really felt the urge to question the house owner, what was the basis of trying to limit visitors when a lockdown was lifted and we were following health guidelines. So I think these are some of the things that I thought I will share initially, and I will be happy to share more thoughts and maybe respond to any questions that might come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruki. I think there were several questions I had in mind when I saw the short film, and you've actually answered some of those questions. But I still am looking at the issue of the children who were migrants in Colombo, but they seemed happy. And they were playing on the beach, and they were traveling in a bus and enjoying, not enjoying so much, but at least feeling the experience. But it is only under lockdown that the real kind of mental distress sets in, because they couldn't move out. They couldn't actually connect with nature. So I am actually of the view, or rather, I have heard some views with regards to lockdowns are a violation of child rights. The effects of the lockdown could potentially be more dangerous for vulnerable children than the virus itself. Would you comment on this view, especially when you take into account the long-term damage that this will cause on the psychosocial well-being of the children and the economic and social well-being of the parents?
First, to share that this is not only during the lockdown. No, even last week, actually, last Tuesday, I met some children, asylum seeker refugee children who have come from different countries, and this is not a time of lockdown. Even then, they were feeling that they were under a lot of pressure because they are living in a very constrained space. Like I said, a big family in one room kind of a setting, and very difficult to have recreation because of their financial status of their parents. So I think that problem only worsened during the pandemic. It was not a problem that started during the pandemic. Children might, when we meet them, when we see them on first impression, they might be laughing, they might be smiling, but that is not the reality in their day-to-day life. That can often be deceiving. Their tears are often hidden. The tears of their parents are often hidden. So I think it's important to try and go beyond the laughter and the smiles that we see on face value. The lockdowns themselves, I think, are meant to actually to protect children and adults alike. They are meant to protect everyone from the deadly pandemic. That's the purpose. But I think what was not there is some protection and support mechanisms for children and various other very vulnerable and marginalized communities to take into account what you said, the impact it will have on their mental health, but also their income. Because income is a major factor. So when there is no income, when there is no food on the table, then that also affects their mental health. The parents, I have met many asylum seeker refugee parents whose mental health is very much affected because they are unable to feed their children, because they are unable to provide a quality education to their children. But that is what affects their mental health. So however amount of psychosocial support and counseling we provide, will not, in the long term, address their mental health issues unless the structural, social, political, economic underlying issues are addressed. So that's been kind of my experience. And I, in a way, relate to the other films that I saw and also the artist talk that I listened to in the morning. And I think this constrained space that I was speaking about from asylum seeker children, refugee children, is very much there for the children who are living in the plantations, in the so-called line rooms, for the urban poor children who are living also in very constrained spaces. So this idea of, I think, constrained space has a very bad impact on children across different communities, whether they are Sri Lankan or whether they are children who are coming from outside Sri Lanka as migrants, as asylum seekers or refugees.
Thank you. If there's no other question, I'd like to ask one more from Ruki. The short film underlines the additional stress the children suffer due to becoming homeless more than once. What were the service and policy gaps within the Sri Lankan state system that didn't help in this matter?
But maybe I will also highlight one positive thing that I see in the Sri Lankan state system, is that the free healthcare we have is also offered to asylum seeker refugee children and adults as well. And I think that is a great service that we offer, and I hope that can continue. I mean, there are some gaps. I have personally experienced a situation in one state hospital where a pregnant lady who was an asylum seeker was treated very badly and discriminated, and we had to intervene to correct that. But by and large, the Sri Lankan state health system has been very helpful to taking care of them. But the same can't be said about the free education system, because we don't extend the free education system. So by extension, I think we also don't provide housing. And I think that is a great tragedy. And I saw in the film, I think at the beginning, that is important to open our doors. I think the sign of opening our hearts is when we actually open our doors. To say that we open our hearts is sometimes meaningless unless we don't open the actual physical door to welcome someone who doesn't have a place to stay. And I travel around Sri Lanka, and I see so many state buildings built with our money, public money, that are abandoned. So many of them. These are more than enough to accommodate these asylum seekers and refugees who come. They just need some renovation, and it just needs some generosity of heart translated into policy, translated into action to provide the houses. I think it's very well within our capacity as a society and as a Sri Lankan state to provide housing and education for these asylum seekers who come to Sri Lanka temporarily at their time of distress. And I also want to highlight in particular after the Easter Sunday disaster, when these people were evicted by their house owners, there were many Sri Lankans who actually opened their doors and said, you come and stay in my house or I'll give you a room. There are people who, someone that I know personally, who offered a house for about 25 asylum seekers, including children. And they were quite happy in that place for a temporary time because it was a house that was not being used. There were others who offered a room in their house temporarily. So there were generous Sri Lankans as well. So I think that generosity has to be multiplied. And also that generosity, that spirit of individual generosity has to be translated into policy and has to be translated into even law. That is when we will be able to, I think, live up to our claim of being hospitable country. You know, hospitality, I think, is not measured by the friendliness and the hospitality we extend to foreign tourists or to cricketers or to artists or people like that. But hospitality will be judged by the hospitality we extend to people in distress, like asylum seekers and refugees.
Thank you. When they were evicted, I think that was a very difficult moment for particularly the children. I was wondering what their response was towards the Sinhalese friends and the little friends she had made while she was living in the other house. When they were evicted from their houses after the Easter bombing.
I don't know actually exactly what happened to that friendship, but I know that they made a lot of friends. You know, when I used to meet them, I used to ask them, and they used to say that they do have friends, and they used to hang out. Even I've noticed in the last house that they stayed, they used to play with the children around on the street along with the other children in that neighborhood. So they did have a lot of friends. But I do know that many children who were evicted from their houses, particularly around Negombo, but also around the Hiwala, Mount Lavinia, after the Easter bombings, they lost their friends. And I think any eviction, any compelled or forced departure from their homes will compel them to lose their friends, not just friends, even the general circumstances that they were comfortable in. And I think that has a very bad effect on the growth and mental health of children.
Thank you, Ruki. Do you have any questions to Ruki? No. We'd like to now go on to the next panelist. Our next panelist is Vasuki Rajasingam. We have a situation where Vasuki is actually managing a school where there are differently able children. And what we must also look at is that they are also additionally disadvantaged because of regional disparities between the provinces and the districts. And they are from Jaffna, Kaitadi. So we have a group of disadvantaged children from Jaffna, and probably these children have gone through the war and they have seen the ravages and the vestiges of being displaced and then coming back to school. So we are looking at a different and a very exclusive and a distinct type of vulnerability here. So Vasuki is going to tell us about the difficulties and the situations faced by these children due to the lockdowns. Vasuki is the principal of Nafeel School for the Deaf and Blind at Kaitadi in Jaffna. Joining us from Jaffna, she will be talking to us about the impact of lockdowns on physically impaired, vulnerable children. Vasuki is also a speech therapist and a language teacher. Welcome, Vasuki, We are very, very happy to have you here. And over to you.
Thank you. I just want to talk about how the pandemic has affected children with disabilities in general. When you look at children with disabilities, generally, whether in schools or in homes, they are disadvantaged in the sense that they are more prone to neglect, abuse, and also their needs are not catered to. This is a fact even in education. In Sri Lanka, we don't have different curricula for children with special needs. All children with different abilities are expected to follow the national curriculum. So these children are already vulnerable. And when situations like the Easter bombs or when there are national disasters or during the pandemic, these vulnerabilities become exacerbated. So there is more neglect, more chances of children with disabilities getting abused, and also their voice is not heard. For example, in a family with 3 children, when there are Zoom classes on, the child with the disability doesn't get the opportunity. So if you have only one phone or one computer, and we find it again and again that the other children are given priority, and the children with the child with the disability is not. And when we speak to the parents and ask them, why this child has not come to class, or why we are unable to connect, whether for therapy or just general class, and they say, the other child has a class, so we can't. And then, they generally assume somehow this particular child's education is not as important as the other children's. So this is the kind of general climate in which we are working. What we find is that children with disabilities have to face greater problems during a situation like this. And many of them, for example, in our school, the majority are hearing impaired, and they have difficulties communicating what they think, mainly because they communicate in sign language, and often even parents don't know sufficient sign language to understand complex conversation. So the children are unable to voice their frustrations, what they want, and things like that. So the situation got very complex because children were under lockdown for a long time. They were unable to come to school. In fact, in our school, some of them actually were insisting, and there was difficulties at home, and some during the lockdown, parents begging us to take them back into the hostel because they could not manage the children, because they felt so isolated during that time. But at least some of these children, now we have a hostel school, so they were able to ask to go to the hostel school so they can talk to their peers, they could talk to other people who use sign language. But then when you look at children with other disabilities, they didn't have an option, and they were, we saw, because we also do a lot of speech therapy for children, other children with other disabilities, and we saw that whatever they had learned communication-wise or even other social skills, during the lockdown, what they had learned, they kind of lost because the parents were not able, even though they were together with the family, the parents didn't have the capacity, maybe they were also undergoing difficulties. They didn't have sufficient energy or motivation to support them in the same way that they were able to under normal circumstances. So these children, what we are seeing now when they are coming back, they had forgotten or they had lost a lot of skills that they had learned, like even things like eating and, eating, how to eat by yourself, independent living. These things they had. So what we find is that this kind of situation actually opens up the normal problems we have in our society, what children with disabilities face normally in our society, but this is exacerbated during a lockdown or during a situation like this where children are confined or forcibly confined to their homes. Now, what I see is that now as a school, we had some contact, not with all the children, but with some of the children, or at least more than 50% of the children we had contact. And we were trying to work, trying to think of their well-being. So we tried to do artwork, craft work, things, encourage them to do gardening. We even posted seeds to them and we shared stories and tried to get them to, get connected with their feelings so that they can talk about their feelings with whoever was around them, even with the little sign language that their families knew. So we tried that, but what we felt was that this was a very small effort. The education system as such, we are very reactive. And I think I was listening to Umeshi, we have to, think of creative ways, creative modes of learning and teaching. And this pandemic actually did offer us that opportunity. And I don't know we really took it or not. And thanks to Ruanti and I'm sorry, I don't know I'm not familiar with the other names, your team, because this is an effort to actually grab the situation and grab the opportunity to do something about it and to rethink about education. Because our education system is highly centralized, it's hierarchical. Now, as a school, we do what the Central Ministry of Education tells us to do. And in the Zoom classes, we are supposed to teach the syllabus. Nothing has changed. And what we don't realize is when the children were confined to their homes, we should rethink that education has to be local. It has to be decentralized. And this was a great opportunity for us to do that, but we didn't do it. Still, we are focused on exams, sending them exam papers that are, all designed in the provincial department, then given to the zonal departments, and then it's all distributed to all the schools, and the children do their work and then send them back. So we are also going through those motions. And this is quite an alienating experience for most children, as we saw in many of the artworks. They didn't feel connected. They are at home. The reality is very different. And we are not using that opportunity, the real situation, to educate our children. And we see that many of our children come from very poor homes. Many of them didn't have enough to eat, and the school had to step in to help financially many of the families. Now, this is the reality of many Sri Lankan homes, and with children with disabilities, they are overwhelmingly from poor homes. So now, when you don't have food, so what is your priority, and what are we teaching them? What we teach them is not anything that is connected to what they are experiencing. And these are the things I think we need to think about in terms of, how can these children's voices be heard? How can we focus on the local? How can local people make decisions? Umesh, you talked about bodies. People were forcibly quarantined. People didn't want to be sent to quarantine centers. Just because somebody fell ill, people were sent to quarantine centers, and sometimes far away to different provinces even from their homes, and people were terrified, and people were hiding, people were running away. And our children also, they were terrified of this, of being sent away from their families. So there was general panic, and nobody felt locally, people locally did not feel that they had the power to decide for themselves where they should live, what they should do with their bodies, what was going to happen to them, just because there was this threat of, COVID-19. So we, as a country, as a society, we don't have a very great tradition of consultation. So all the decisions are made at the top, and then, we are told what to do. And during the pandemic, this is what happened. And I think with children with disabilities, what I would like to stress is we have to figure out ways of listening to them, getting feedback from them. What is it that they need? What is it that they want? And that our education system should be more dynamic and should be more consultative and more local, and more people the people who are actually involved in the education of children, they should have more say in what children learn. So, and this is where I think the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us, it's thrown up these questions at us. And it's a great opportunity for us to actually think about this and maybe try making some differences.
Thank you, Vasuki. It's a very positive approach to what we perceive as a big problem, which is lockdowns and COVID. It is definitely true that every adversity has an opportunity hidden within it. And whether we take it and use it is entirely up to us. And definitely a change in the education system, the way children are taught, is very important to be reviewed. And although we feel right now that we didn't make use of it, what has happened is that children, parents, and teachers, and even schools have had a taste of it. And I think the result or the impact of it will be seen in years to come. I totally endorse your point of view of education being local, and also, being focused on the body, like Umeshi was saying. But my point is that vulnerabilities of physical impairment of children were definitely further exacerbated by the lockdowns. But from the artwork of the students, it is observed that mental impairment was caused in addition to all their other vulnerabilities. Because there was one artwork which showed a child trapped inside a sanitizer bottle. I thought that was very poignant. There were so many sanitizer bottles and all the children were trapped inside it, inside the school. That was very, very beautifully done. And there was also, I think, because it's Kaitadi and it is Jaffna, I feel that the regional disparities showed in the way that the children were able to connect with on online courses. There was a desperate attempt by one of the child to say, how she was unable to learn through Zoom because there was no signal, there was no connection, and also she didn't understand the technology. So there are these additional questions or problems with having to be in another region. There is, of course, the lockdowns is also a problem because it just doesn't just separate you from friends and family, but it discontinues your sports, your leisure activities, like connecting with nature. I think this is so important, which the children need to have. But Vasuki, I have a question, is that in what way did the parents and children cope with this increased stress, anxiety and depression? Were there any kind of coping mechanism that they used which can be then replicated in other places?
I think, different families have different, it also depended on the culture of the family, and we also have children from other regions. So quite a few of the children wanted to talk. Before we started all these Zoom classes and all that, initially they wanted to talk to their teachers. So one grandmother, this boy didn't have parents, and she had to take him miles walking because they didn't have a phone. They were very poor, so that they could access a smartphone to talk with his teacher. Because he wanted to connect. So that was, somebody was willing to, one grandmother was willing to do that. And what we found that was, because our children are mainly sign language users, the biggest challenge was communication and lack of communication and isolation. They wanted to talk to their friends because their friends only knew the most sign. Most of their family didn't understand enough sign language. So that was something. So one of the things we did as a school was whenever children were able to come in class, we agreed that, the beginning of a class, the children are allowed to chat to each other for a while before they start teaching. So that's something that we did. Some children were able to talk to each other in terms of, parents who had were able to support, with their phones, talk to each other. But some families actually didn't cope. So what they did was they brought the children to the hostel. So it was kind of, and we had to support them because they couldn't cope. But a number of them actually, like other children, I think they found that doing art activity, craft, because some of our teachers actually got very creative. They used anything that you can, very cheap things like leaves, stones, anything that you get, nothing that you needed to buy. But, gave them ideas as what you can do. So then immediately we will get pictures of things that the children do and they send us on WhatsApp. All this. And so that was, so creating class groups and sharing the activities, cooking. A lot of them started cooking, supporting their families, and they enjoyed it, gardening. And these are the things generally children enjoyed. And I think that really helped them. But what I felt was, whatever we were teaching them, a so-called syllabus, was quite disconnected from these things that we were doing. This was like something separate that we did. We thought, we had to do. And so I felt it was like patchwork. So we need something more integrated, something more cohesive that works with what is available in the local and what is available for families, easily accessible. Then we can actually rethink of, equality and equality of education. Now you find that those who have access to technology, computers, sufficient network, in the long term, after 2 years, these children those who are from affluent homes are going to be definitely advantaged. And the disadvantaged are going to be more disadvantaged. So this is going to be a generational, a big difference, which we will see in times to come. So if we want to bridge this gap, we have to find what are the resources that these families have that we can capitalize on, maximize on. What can they give, and how can we work with families with the resources they have, which many farming families, how can we get redefine, reshape our education so that we can help children learn in those contexts as well.
Thank you. I think that was very resourceful from your side. I'm looking at policy and service gaps. The gaps in services and policy has been a very important factor that has failed our children in this country during this COVID. And it applies to migrant children, it applies to physically impaired children, and even children from lower socioeconomic groups. Now, what were the gaps in services and policy in caring for the children during the lockdown that you faced? And did you have to face challenges of the vulnerable children falling into these gaps in services and policy? Adding that lockdown measures have removed most of the usual ways of identifying children at risk.
Right. So, for instance, where vaccines were concerned, I think the health system actually prioritized children with disabilities. So, and through the school. So in that way, because the health system works very well in terms of identifying these children as a separate category, and then getting vaccines was an easy. But in everything else, what I felt was, say for example, in many other countries, vulnerable groups are identified and prioritized in these kinds of situations. So whether it's women, elderly, children, and particularly children with disabilities. So I didn't see that in the education system that there was any concern at all that the kind of positive discrimination kind of thing. Concern in terms of children with disability. There was nothing at all, nothing present. And I think it was more out of ignorance than anything else. So as a country, I think generally, when any kind of disaster, any kind of situation like this crops up on us, we don't think particularly about vulnerable groups, such as, after the Easter bombs, Muslim women were targeted, Muslim girl students were targeted because, of their dress. In the north, they were targeted. So, and education system didn't have a policy to protect or to cater to their needs. In the same way, with children with disabilities, there was no concern. I don't think there is any concern about their education, about their situation as being more vulnerable, particularly that they could also be more prone to abuse. And these things are not identified, not specified. So in the education system, even though there is special units and all that, when a situation like this happens, I think we should be ready with identified issues and concerns for these groups of people, and then how we should know how we should react, how we should respond, what we should be doing. And the health system, or the health system, had a kind of special system for children with disabilities and specific disorders. They prioritized in terms of vaccines. That was a very specific thing. But generally, education system has not given much importance to these children. In fact, just like the families, they think, I think, okay, they are like addendum. Now we look at the mainstream schools and the education, and once everything is through, then we think about these children. So, and it's the wrong way to go about it. We should actually start giving more importance to these vulnerable groups, I think.
Absolutely. Now that you have highlighted this issue, now there are policy gaps in education and health, and the circulars actually are generic but not vulnerable children specific. So in this situation, what do you think that we could do, or rather the education system could do, or even the state apparatus could do, in order to be more prepared to face such situation if it should happen again?
I think it is not just the education system, the country as a whole. If you take in any area, I mean, I think Ruki might be able to enlighten us on this, and any area, we don't have this culture of, prioritizing vulnerable groups. So it's a change in the way we think. So I don't think easily state apparatus is going to change before we can change the general culture of thinking in terms of, particularly in this area, in terms of policy. They are not going to prioritize these vulnerable groups. It has to be these vulnerable groups and the support groups that need to advocate for this kind of change. And this particular forum and similar fora can actually start doing that. And I think it's only the people on the margins, when they start voicing this, and when their voices are heard, maybe there could be a difference in terms of that. I think in terms of policy change, I think we have a long way to go, because every single policymaker has to start to think differently. It has to be a change in the mindset. So let's say if we are a group of people, we want to do something, I think we have to target a kind of large scale advocacy work in terms of each of these vulnerable groups, and how important it is for us as a community, as a society, to protect our vulnerable groups. We don't think like that. We generally tend to think the vulnerable groups, we push them on the periphery. That's Sri Lanka. So that's a kind of, full turn around. But it's possible, I think. What's happening in the festival is an event like that. So,
Absolutely. I think the mindset has to change first before the changes can happen in the policy and also in the service delivery. I'd like to ask the panelists if they have any questions for Vasuki. No. Okay. Thank you so much, Vasuki. It was a very resourceful and a very forceful presentation. And we would now like to go on to Avanka. Avanka Fernando. Avanka Fernando is a lecturer in the Department of Sociology and in the Faculty of Arts, University of Colombo. She's currently reading for a PhD in social anthropology at School of Global Studies in the University of Sussex, UK. Her interests have focused on urban poor, vulnerability, children at risk, urban development and resettlement. She is joining us from the UK via Zoom. Welcome, Avanka. And we'd like to hear from you your ideas, your thoughts, your research, your findings about how lockdown has affected children in the lower socioeconomic sector. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you to the organizers for this opportunity to speak at the Children in Lockdown Festival. I think there will also be a slide presentation which will be shared. I might just mention the slides as I go along. Yeah, it is a real privilege to be a part of this creative space where different perspectives of children, of people who are working with children and in the field with different groups of vulnerable people being presented. I mean, I've just learned so much from the last and thank you for giving me this opportunity. So the topic of my presentation is looking at constructing home in a high-rise housing project in the city of Colombo in Sri Lanka. We'll go to the next slide. I think one of the kind of underlying themes was that with the lockdown, the sort of underlying inequalities and the sort of vulnerabilities that are already pre-existent in the structure were exacerbated with the lockdown and with the kind of global pandemic of the global impact of COVID-19. This is really what I also want to kind of focus very much on, because my study really was conducted starting from 2019. And I think we mentioned this thought about the impact of the Easter attacks, and some of these really national and then the global kind of impact of COVID. We see how that, I think sorry, I can't see the slides, but maybe it will be shared from the team. Yeah, so I'll just go on because I'm not sharing the screen. Right. So yeah, so my research study actually looks at the high-rise housing. Do you want me to share the slides? I'm sorry about this. Right. So my research study explores a kind of the communities in the high-rise housing projects, and I give this a pseudonym and call it Crystal Code because I don't want to mention the name of my community. But this is sort of it symbolizes some of the many high-rise housing projects also that have been constructed, and these housing projects are for the urban poor or the Vatta dwellers from the city of Colombo who were resettled in 2018. So this the urban resettlement projects were supposed to be this kind of Palpata to Rajamaligawa or palace transition, and it was supposed to eradicate slums and shanties, and in development jargon, to make Colombo a world-class city. And this is, so I kind of, I worked in one of these communities that had been resettled. And in this presentation that, you know, I will be really focusing on the life worlds of children and the youth with whom I had close contact and their experiences of home, not only during the lockdown, but before and also during the lockdown. From the start, I would like to mention that, you know, I was just brought into these the life stories and the life worlds of these children, and they are the experts and specialists regarding their life. And I'm just a channel, and I will be just speaking and giving us, shedding some light, hopefully, to their life worlds. So my key research methodology was based on participant observation. So I actually live on the 14th floor of one of these housing blocks, and I'd just like to present some of the experiences that I had with the children. Uh, so on it, this is slide 3, if the slide presentation is working, but if not, it's fine. On a child-led tour, the children showed me their former Vatta or their old Vatta, and Sashika, who was 14 years old, said, "We really miss our old home. The happiness we had in our earlier home is not there in the flat. We can't play. In the flat, we can't go here and there and talk with whoever we want. There is no happiness in the flat like there was in the Vatta." And as they showed me their Vatta or their old homes, they suddenly became very animated. It was as if this experience in their old Vatta had really brought them to life. And Nidarshan, a boy who they call Golu Master, because he was prone to stuttering, began to recall the names of the dogs that they had left behind. He and his the other friends showed me their old pets in their old vattas, and this sense of nostalgia, the childhood memories and the sense of freedom they had in their old home was seen as being very different to the experiences that they were having within Crystal Court. And this articulates how home is not just a house or an apartment or a dwelling which is given to them by the state. Home impacted the core or the very essence of their being. It was an emotional domain. It was a feeling which was generated by things like trees and allers or streams, people and relationships, pets who they had even left behind, places and processes, places where they would hide, places where they, things they would use to make their toys, how they would shout and laugh, how the grass would feel under their feet. In another Vatta, I was just going in a vehicle on a trip around the Vatta. And during this trip, the children were shouting and screaming as loud as they could. And I was very amused because for me, I realized this was rather uncharacteristic of them. I had rarely heard them shout and scream as much and in such an unrestrained way in Crystal Court or in the flat. But here in the Vatta, they possessed this sense of unrestrained freedom and happiness, which I felt was everything that childhood should be. So back in the flat, I spoke with Ahilani from the 7th floor. She was a 16-year-old girl, and the 7th floor had the most number of children in this flat, and there was very restricted play space on the 7th floor, and many a disastrous conflict was waged for play space on the 7th floor. So Ahilani articulated the restrictions of her new home and the sense of entrapment that she felt. She said something that actually Umeshi also alluded to in her presentation. In the flat, it's like we are in a prison. We can't go up or down. We have problems if we stay inside the house or when we go outside. And we are supposed to just stay at our doorstep. There is no freedom in this flat. And one day she was so furious, she told me that if one of those presidential candidates come and he was about to sort of visit the flat, that she would tell him everything. And she was talking and talking at a very fast pace. And she said, no one scolds any other floor. They scold only us. They scold only the children. They all come to the 7th floor only. The 3rd floor and the 10th floor. All the children, they come here. They all come to this corner. Me mullata tamai enni. Our friends don't come here. All other people's friends only. All come to the 7th floor. The boys, they come here. Pirimilamai okkoma meheta tamai enni. They all come to this corner. Kelavaratama tamai enni. They all come here. For Ahi, her physical and emotional space within the flat had been suddenly contracted. And she felt that even her attempts to find relief in digital spaces was controlled by the watchful eye of her mother, who suspected that she was having affairs with boys online. So this sense of restriction and freedom is not uncommon for young girls or young people in Sri Lanka and South Asia. But we see that with urban development and resettlement projects, this spatial and emotional restrictions had suddenly been intensified. The space of their home and their freedom was suddenly limited to the threshold of their house or even to the balcony, if they were lucky enough to get to the balcony. So the architecture of the tower block meant that interactions in the block were very public, and often the older sort of community members would cast judgment against the children and their behavior whenever they would come onto the balcony. And this sense of injustice was seen in Ahi, who was severely restricted by her parents, but also stemmed from the fact that the boys who played in the Kelavara, the Mulla, were not so restricted. Slide 10, if the presentation is working. So restrictions were not merely attributed to one's parents and neighbors, but also included state surveillance, especially during the lockdown. So Joanna, a pseudonym, 13 years old, her artwork, which hopefully would be up on the slide, depicts the kind of sense of surveillance where she drew an image of Crystal Court during the COVID-19 lockdowns. So the image shows her home or this flat, and there is the kind of rather ominous figure of a policeman with a baton at the gate, and also an ambulance. So this picture actually resonated very strongly with the children in Crystal Court. But for many boys, the baton didn't merely symbolize the policeman who was at the gate. Baton stripes were also etched into the bodies of Ahilani's brother Rajan, who was 13 years old, and his friends from the 7th floor, who had faced the retribution of the police force. When a few sparks from the skyrockets last year ended up on a police officer's head, it resulted in the boys being caught and soundly whipped for their alleged involvement in this criminal offense. So safety of play space was often threatened during the lockdowns. Policemen would suddenly break onto the floor and break into the floor and break up their carom games. As a mother of one of my respondents said, the flat is not the only thing under lockdown. Education, happiness, childhood, all of these things are also under lockdown. So this experience of home in a flat, or this sort of Rajamaligava, was a stark contrast with the happiness and freedom in their former home. It is also important to realize, as was mentioned, that children belonging maybe to a majority religion and ethnicity were less restricted, and they could use their social capital to navigate some of the run-ins, whereas those from minoritized groups were obviously more disadvantaged. And this sense of living in an uncertain and unsafe environment is further intensified by the frequent lockdowns and quarantine. I remember spending my birthday last year, where Sunday they had mass testing, and the day of my birthday I was woken up by a call of one little girl who I worked with saying, "Ape amma geniyana, ape amma geniyana." And they were just taking a lot of women mainly to these quarantine centers because they found that they had some mild symptoms of COVID. And, their mental health was severely affected by being separated from their parents. Their parents were taken into quarantine. They were not allowed into the house. There was also, as mentioned again by some of the other presenters, a sense of stigma and the need to sort of be forced to stay within one's house the whole day. A religious leader on the 10th floor of this flat said that one of the most common threats that the children on her floor made, and that she would hear the fights, was that when the parents didn't allow them to go to the kade to buy some toffees, that they would say that they'll jump off the balcony. So we see how the lockdowns had created an impact on the physical, emotional, but also the mental health of the children. So all is, I don't want to sort of end with a negative note, but I would like to also show some of the positives of the community I work with and some of the young respondents who really impacted my life. So I'd like to just end with a case study of a girl called Jancy, again a pseudonym. She was 15 years old, and when I just met Jancy, she just opened her life world to me. She, without much prompting, and she actually helped me a lot in the sort of work I did. She introduced me to people, and I mean, she took me into their homes to such an extent that, you know, she was so sort of enthusiastic. I really couldn't people didn't have an option but to sort of accept me and warmly welcome me. But Jancy's life had also, she had very different experiences of home. She told me of her childhood home, how she lived with her parents, how her father had left her mother, how her parents moved to the flat, the experiences she had of sexual abuse, and how she would engage in certain behavior, like cutting herself when she got angry and she couldn't just deal with some of the anger and the emotions that she had. And we see that her family and childhood experiences had made her increasingly vulnerable. She was also vulnerable due to the sort of labeling and the stereotyping by the community. And I think this is something that I really like to stress, that sometimes community and sort of societal stereotypes can really contain and cause a lot of conflict in people, particularly children. So Jancy was seen as being a person who was a bad girl, and that she would bring shame to her family. She was a person who created conflict and was always getting into these valleys with her brothers and her uncle. At one stage, her uncle had tried to throttle her during the lockdown. She was living, actually, there were 9 people in her house, and they were, as Umesh mentioned, living in a 450 square feet, 500 square feet house. Then also this idea, she was seen as a thief, so she had a bit of a problem with money, and she had gone and stolen money from one of the main kades, and she had been publicly humiliated, where the kade owner and her mother had just thrashed her in public space. And bad time, Velava. So this was also a Naraka Velava for Jancy, and she had the sort of malevolent spirits of a dead relative in her body, and that this was going to be one of the ways that she would come to an end. She was actually going to jump off the balcony, and this idea of Velava and the kind of prophecies or predictions that had been made about Jancy also really affected her. Just recently, she just called me, and she was talking about her something that she, feeling that she had almost tried to jump off the balcony. And this was very sad, because you see how some of these societal the ideas and the thoughts that had been put into her mind actually affected not only her past, her present, but also the types of things that she did and her future. So Jancy's life actually epitomized for me the lives of many children in Crystal Court, but also the entire community. And through Jancy's life, I was able to learn some of the cultural patterns of the community. And I just want to highlight 3 last things. And one is that when we do work with children, particularly in vulnerable situations, it is so important for us to identify the context. Vulnerability and risk was not uncommon to the children in the flat. Debt, family problems, livelihood, irregular employment was not something, uncommon for them. But with COVID, they became put into a more vulnerable and precarious situation. And the fragmented social structure was torn even further asunder. And secondly, the need to extend beyond stereotypes. So Jancy's life and even this entire flat was actually identified as a hotspot for COVID. And this created and exacerbated the sort of stereotypes that they had, that this was a place for drugs, that this was a place for uneducated people, poor people. So all these stereotypes were exacerbated further with this whole lockdown. But there were people like Jancy who, became one of my closest friends. She was so helpful. She was a babysitter for so many children in the neighborhood, and her warm and resilient spirit was an inspiration. And the other thing is the final point, and I'm going to stop here for sure. This is the idea of recognizing strengths. So it also brings us to the fact that we need to look at some of the community strengths, the strengths of children. Not we need to extend beyond this idea that children are vulnerable. Yes, they are, but we also have to look at the strengths, the resources, and the creativity of children rather than just focusing on problems and pathologies. And I think this is something I really learned about them, and just was so inspired by their creativity, and also by the kind of care that they extended for each other during the lockdown. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Avanka. That's a lot of information, a lot of views, and a lot of issues you have highlighted. I'm sure we are all we are all brimming with lots of questions. I'm sure Ruki is also looking as though he has something to ask you. But before we proceed on to the questions for you, I'd like to say that I'm completely in sympathy with your work and your research, because I share your passion, and your passion showed in the connectedness you have with the community. I share your passion because I did a thesis myself on Maligavatta housing scheme on the same topic that you're doing almost 40 years ago. So this problem is not new. It's been there for a long time. And I think in the book, Life and Death of American Cities, Jane Jacob has highlighted this so well. I mean, and this is also ideas in the 60s where they say people in the Vattas are much better off than on high-rise schemes. Yeah. But we still build high-rise and we still put them in these prisons. I don't know where the logic is. But going on to the current issue, I would like to ask Avanka a few questions, but before that, I'd like to just highlight the point she made about lockdowns, that it was not lockdowns of people and children, but it was lockdown of happiness, lockdown of education, lockdown of dancing, lockdown of connecting with nature. So this lockdown is manifold, and it has affected the people as well as the children in quite a lot of ways. In an online survey done on families, they said that 69% of the children involved in this lockdown had sleep disorders. And this means that, they are mentally distressed and their routines are disrupted. And the children who had balconies and gardens were much or slightly better off than the other children. So this restricting the space for children has very, very, very deep and long-standing effects on children's happiness, their mental state, their mental well-being. So my question to Avanka is, you're quite right saying that the inherent inequalities exacerbate the situation, and that policy planning is reactive, not proactive. And we also notice that digital protective mechanism doesn't exist, whereas the children were forced into accessing digital services in order to study, in order to connect with friends and family. How would you say that we need to change the approach in terms of putting children in touch with digital facilities?
Okay. So I think thank you, and I think this is again the whole idea of the development discourse. This has been happening and in the USA, France, China, UK, all of these places have, I think, it's a sort of tried and tested method of sort of this resettlement into high rises. And as you said, 40 years ago, you were doing your research on this, and still we are grappling with some of these same problems. So there is a disconnect between research and practice and policy making. So it is essential for us to really take some of these examples, the research into the kind of policy making and decision making. But as you said regarding the digital devices, I think one of the problems is that there is also a lack of access, and this has been highlighted by many of the others. But the need to also see that this is a group that is very important because, and this, I mean, in this particular housing complex, the housing project, there are 918 households. And in each household, there would be maybe people from about 4 to, and Jancy's situation was like 9. That is, I think, one of the more the larger households. But kind of, there would be at least about 1,000 to 1,200 in just one block alone, and there would be about 4 to 5 apartment blocks. So like that, you know, you have this high density kind of housing projects. And just one of the issues was accessibility, particularly due to devices, but also the data and the signal. So, I mean, when I was living, I realized that I was just totally off the internet for a couple of months because, you know, I didn't have the accessibility, and particularly because it's a high dense kind of area, the signal and signal towers. Somebody's going to, would have to just explain the kind of more technological features for this. But because of this, there was a very limited connectivity. And even though some of the community-based organizations, the Sabapati and all, had asked that another signal tower be put, they hadn't. So it's also this fact that they're not taken seriously because, of course, they are a group of people who are labeled as low income or people who don't, you know, make a big contribution, which obviously is not true. I mean, just try to run the city of Colombo without their input and their contribution, and you, I mean, have the whole city just going to waste, literally. So I think this is one of the most important things, is that we need to extend beyond those stereotypes and see some of these groups as a very valuable set of people who are contributing. Their children often in the schools will be stereotyped and said, okay, these children may and that kind of attitude. But and of course, those very parents also probably would not have had proper education. So as a result, they might not be able to give the same amount of help to their, and help and support to their children as maybe another family. But one of the things is they still do care very deeply for their children's education, and they really do want to see their children going into some field, and they're always saying so that kind of idea is always there. So ඉගෙන ගන්න තමයි මේ ළමයිව ඉස්කෝලේට යවන්නේ. So this there is that real need for education, but the problem is the lack of resources, also the accessibility, and also the kind of information that is given to them about education. The other thing, in terms of devices, I think also it is essential, and this is not just for one group of children, but the awareness about how to use digital devices, sort of the consciousness regarding maybe some of the risks that could occur through digital education. And this was something we were able to do last year. We gave the whole housing project in which I was working well-being packs, and in those well-being packs we also included the NCPA digital sort of safety guidelines, and I was able to sort of connect with the NCPA to work with them for that. But I think there is such a need for also digital awareness, digital safety, how people are engaging with devices, the need to, for exercise and not always be looking at devices. And some of these things are things that really need to be taken into consideration when we are considering digital education and devices.
Thank
I
you,
hope that
Avanka.
answers your question.
The children in the high rise, they were actually bordering on being suicidal, wanting to jump off the balcony. And also they felt that although they were supposed to be in a safe space, or they were made to feel that they have to be under lockdown in order for them to be safe and to make other people safe. But then they had the intrusion by the police with baton around, which made it very unsafe for them, and they felt insecure. What were their feelings about it? Did they say, did they felt, shall we say cheated? Or, to say, they said we were going to be safe, but we are not safe, that kind of point of view. Did any of the children come out with those kind of views?
Yeah, so I think I think there was this idea of being pursued by so there was like police posts which were very close to the community, and they would constantly come and police or surveil these communities, and this was almost something which was taken for granted. And I'm sure you all would have all sort of watched the kind of the drama that was unfolding during the lockdown, where so many people were taken into custody. Some drug dealer was caught, or this person was caught, and all this, so it was a part of a larger narrative, obviously. But also one of the things is that, this idea of on the kind of site, there was obviously some anger when some, I'll just give a small example where some of the children were playing and they had, I think by a couple of days before, had thrown water at the policeman. And as a result, suddenly the policeman came running up about the next day or something, and they just took their carom boards, and the children took that they took the carom board and ran. But some of the chairs and the tables, the policeman had just taken and dashed it on the ground from the 7th floor. And these were plastic chairs, and plastic chairs, we might think are not a big deal, but for those families, that was quite a expensive thing. And yeah, obvious in that situation, their play space was threatened, and for the young people, it was a kind of threat. But for them, it was almost like a bit of a drama and fun kind of thing as well. So it was like this horror police kind of thing, where when the police came, they just run and hide and all of that. So one of the issues is this whole sort of lockdown, the police coming. Sorry, my internet connection is a little unstable. All of that had just been sort of legitimized. It was something which was okay, and they wouldn't really kind of rebel against it or resist it unless it had come to a really bad point or a breaking point. And I think last year they had been kept under lockdown for 60 plus days. So from October to December, they were under lockdown and strict lockdown. This was not the national lockdown, but a more regional lockdown. And they were just kept without being allowed to go out. Some families were taken into quarantine and brought back, and that also in the middle of the night. But there was absolutely no kind of resistance until the end of the sort of 60 days. And then at that point, they just burst out of the gate. So this is, I think, one of the problems. When certain communities, when vulnerable communities are oppressed, and often their rights are just suppressed, sometimes it comes to a breaking point, and then only they will react against it, and then it's reactive. So this is something which we really need to think about. And they were very, to come into your question, I gone round, unfortunately, but I think they did find that their play space was being threatened. They were feeling upset, particularly at the point when they had been hit. And at that point, I said, we should just speak to the, I don't want to go into those details, but I did say that we really need to do something. But they said, no, there's no point. We will be highlighted. There will be more issues that come about. So that kind of safety, unsafety kind of issue did come up. But there were times when they just said, no, we are not going to do anything about it because it's just going to get worse if we do.
Yes, I think that's a valid point. I'd like to now go on to ask you about policy and service gaps that actually accentuated and made the situation worse. Was there something that you would suggest or recommend that government or local authorities or UDA could take on in order to confront a similar situation if it should happen again, God forbid?
So I think definitely the proper kind of communication needs to go through, and communication, I think the sort of sense of uncertainty which was created by COVID-19 was also made a mode of control, a method of control. And, that's not something that we should use as a method of control. It was used to sort of further exacerbate some of the kind of control mechanisms on particular communities. I mean, I think in other places in Colombo, if you just contrast it to the kind of control that was in some of these communities, it's very, very different. And even the people in those communities, they said that flat is not as controlled as this flat. So, there was, sometimes it depends on who or what social capital you have in relation to how a particular law or policy is implemented. So I think these are very sort of broad level national kind of ideas. But I think one is that you do need to have proper communication. But secondly, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. I think it is also important to look at some of the communities, because the communities themselves have some of those solutions. And I know I was working very closely with the police also in certain instances, the police, the Sabapati, and some of these community-based organizations. And the Sabapati had a perfect plan on how to create better safety. But then suddenly, the lift was one of the main ways of transport. And the police had sort of put a kind of rule saying only one lift is going to be working. So then what happened was everybody just started packing into the other lift. and that obviously created an impact on the safety and the spread of COVID. So I think there is a real need to also look at the ground situation, to take the ground knowledge, the local knowledge. And that is, I think, what we so often just fail to realize. We think, we think that it's the kind of, we have to redefine who are the specialists. Are they the people who, have, and that's why I said, I'm not the specialist here. But maybe it is actually the people who are on the ground. It's those, maybe the children who need to be redefining our ideas of development, because ultimately at the end of the day, they are the people who will be living in the communities, who will be living in the places we designed for them. So I think it is that idea that we really need to take into consideration. I just quote from Umeshi, who will be actually working in that flat, in some of those flats, but the idea that we really need to go forward with hope and action. And I think this has been a start, but it is essential that it is translated into more sort of proactive thinking and planning.
Thank you, Avanka. You've not only just showed us how to get help from the state or the service, but also how to use the children's strength in order to make it better next time. We'd like to now go on to Umeshi Rajendra, who is also joining us from, I think, UK or USA.
No, I'm actually currently in Sri Lanka.
Sorry?
I am currently in Sri Lanka, actually.
Oh, right. Okay, you're from here. Well, it doesn't matter, does it? I mean, it's Zoom means it can be from anywhere. Anyway, welcome, Umeshi. Umeshi is a dance artist and a lecturer at Mesh Ground for Festival. Artists talk on her research with children in UDA housing schemes, so it is actually directly connected with what Avanka is talking about. Umeshi, over to you.
I just wanted to say a quick thank you to Avanka for all her great help, because our work and my artist talk wouldn't mean sense if not for like her research that has really sort of greatly helped shed light on like the struggles that the kids are facing. And I just hope that we can sort of continue this work and really have conversations with the children themselves. Like Avanka said, the community themselves have solutions, and the community themselves have ideas and thoughts on what could help them that's hopefully conducive for the environment that can be positive. So I really look forward to working with these children in the future, and I really hope that we are able to engage policymakers so they can create a sustainable relationship. I do think that, holding workshops, classes, and giving kids the tools and strategies with which they could expand their own thinking, expand the way they think about their own environment, is what will be beneficial in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Meshi. We've been watching your talk as well, and I think you're making a very valid point in the importance of the body and the body movement, and how the mind is not just in the brain, but it is in the body as well, and that how we should be able to become more aware of it through movement, so that we are able to get in sync with it. I think this is a very, very valid and a very, it's a new way of looking at ourselves, actually. When I was growing up, we never saw it like that. But of course, this is very important, and this is what has been denied for the children in lockdown. And so thank you very much for your contribution. And it looks like we have some questions. I'm unable to get through to it. Pumi, where is it? Is it coming through on my WhatsApp? I think it might be simpler if you ask it, yes.
It's to Loka about his creation process with the children. About Pillaigalai Eluir.
தேங்க்யூ நன்றி. உண்மையிலே இது வந்து ஒரு எங்களுக்கு கிடைச்ச ஒரு முக்கியமான ஒரு வாய்ப்புன்னு தான் சொல்லணும். அதாவது இந்த நாடகத்துக்கு முன்னுக்கு இருந்த அனுபவமும் அதுக்கு பின்னுக்கு இருந்த அனுபவத்தையும் இப்போ நான் கொஞ்சம் சொல்ல விருப்பப்படுறேன். இந்த நாடகம் வந்து நாங்கள் ஒரு 20 பிள்ளைகளை வச்சு இந்த நாடகம் செய்யணும்னு நினச்ச போது அதுக்கு நாங்கள் போய் சில பிள்ளைகளை முதல்ல இது ஸ்கூலில் செய்யணுன்னு தான் நாங்கள் விருப்பப்பட்டோம். ஆனால் ஸ்கூல் அந்த காலத்தில் வந்து லாக்டவுன் பண்ணி எல்லா இடத்துலையும் மூடி இருந்ததுனால நாங்கள் ஒரு எஸ்டேட், ஒரு தோட்டப்புறத்தை நாங்கள் தெரிவு செஞ்சு அதில் இருந்த மாணவர்களை கொண்டு இந்த நாடகத்தை செய்கிறதுக்காக முதலாவதாக நாங்கள் நினச்சிருந்தோம். அப்போ ஒரு 20 பிள்ளைகள் கொண்டு இந்த நாடகத்தை செய்கிறதுக்கு முதலாவது ஒரு 4 நாள் ட்ரைனிங் ஒர்க் ஷாப் ஒன்று அவங்களுக்கு செஞ்சுருந்த பொழுது மறுபடியும் நாட்டில் லாக்டவுன் போடப்பட்டாங்க. அப்போ அந்த 20 பிள்ளைகளும் அந்த கிட்டத்தட்ட ஒரு 3 மாத காலமாக லாக்டவுன் இருந்தபடியால் அந்த தொடர்ச்சியாக அந்த ட்ரைனிங் ப்ரோசஸை எங்களால் செய்ய முடியல. அது பிறகு அந்த 20 பிள்ளைகளில் இருந்து ஒரு 11 பிள்ளைகள் இந்த லாக்டவுன் பிரச்சனைகள்லாம் முடிஞ்சு ஒரு 6 நாள் இந்த நாடகம் செய்கிறதுக்காக ரெடியாகி வந்தாங்க. இப்போ அந்த நாடகத்தில் பார்த்தீங்கன்னு சொன்னால் 11 பிள்ளைகள் இருக்கிறாங்க. 11 பிள்ளைகளும் 11 கதைகள் சொல்கிறாங்க. ஆனால் அதனையும் தாண்டி அந்த பிள்ளைகளுக்கு ஒரு அனுபவம் இருக்குது. ஏன்னா 11 பிள்ளைகளுக்கும் அனுபவங்கள் இருக்குது. ஒவ்வொரு பிள்ளைகளும் வந்து காலையில் எழும்பி சில நேரம் தங்களுடைய பெற்றோர்களுக்கு சாப்பாடு இந்த மாதிரி விஷயங்களை கொண்டு போய் அவங்க வேலை செய்கிற இடங்களில் கொடுத்துட்டு தான் இந்த நாடகம் பழக்கிறதுக்கு வந்தாங்க. சில பிள்ளைகள் அதில் இருக்கிற அந்த பொம்பளை பிள்ளைக்கு வந்து ரொம்ப வீட்டில் வேலை பளு அதிகம். காரணம் என்னென்னு கேட்டால் அவருடைய பெற்றோர்களுக்கு வந்து வேறு மேலதிக வருமானங்கள் தேடி போகிறதுக்கான ஒரு சந்தர்ப்பம் ஏற்பட்டது, ஒரு நிர்பந்தம் ஏற்பட்டது. ஏன்னா அந்த கொரோனானால். அதனால் புறத்தில் கொடுத்த அந்த வேலையை தவிர மேலதிகமான வேலைகள் செய்கிறதுனால வீட்டு பொறுப்புகள் வந்து இந்த பிள்ளைகளிடம் வந்தது. அதில் இருக்கிற அந்த பொம்பளை பிள்ளை காலையில் 5:30 மணிக்கு எழும்பி வீட்டில் எல்லாருக்கும் சமைச்சி காலை சாப்பாடு, அதே மாதிரி பகல் நேர சாப்பாடு இதெல்லாம் சமைச்சி, பிறகு அம்மா அப்பாவுக்கு வேலைக்கு போகும்போது அவங்களுக்கு சாப்பாடை எல்லாம் வேலைக்கு கொண்டு போகிறதுக்காக கட்டி கொடுத்துட்டு தான் இந்த நாடக ப்ராக்டிஸ்க்கு வரும். அங்கே வந்து அந்த பிள்ளை வந்து தன்னுடைய அந்த வீட்டில் இருந்த அந்த இறுக்கமான சூழ்நிலையில் இருந்து விடுபட்டு கொஞ்சம் சந்தோஷமாக இருந்து மனம் விட்டு பேசுகிறதுக்கு அந்த பிள்ளைக்கு ஒரு வாய்ப்பு கிடைச்சது. அதே மாதிரி சில பிள்ளைகளுக்கு வந்து தங்களுடைய தம்பியவோ தங்கையவோ பராமரிக்க வேண்டிய பொறுப்பு இருந்தது. அவங்களோடையே வந்து இந்த நாடகத்தில் இருந்தாங்க. இப்படி அவங்க சில பேர் வந்து ரொம்ப தூரத்தில் இருந்து வந்தாங்க. அவங்களுக்கு ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்பட்டு தான் அந்த பிள்ளைகள் வந்து இதில் இருந்தது. ஆரம்பத்தில் அம்மா அப்பாவுக்கு இதில் வந்து என்ன செய்கிறாங்க, பிள்ளைகள் எங்கே போகிறாங்க, ஸ்கூல் இல்லாத டைமில் அப்படியே எங்கேயும் போகிறாங்களா, அதாவது அவங்க சும்மா ஏதோ ஒரு காலத்தை வீணடிக்கிறதுக்காக வீட்டிலேருந்து போகிறாங்க அப்படின்ற ஒரு தெளிவில்லாத ஒரு தன்மை இருந்துச்சு. பிறகு நாங்கள் ஒரு குழுவாக இருந்து அவங்க வீட்டுக்கு போய் ஒவ்வொரு அம்மா பெற்றோரோட்டையும் கதைச்சி இந்த பிள்ளைகள் இப்படியான வேலைகளுக்கு தான் வருதுன்னு சொல்லி அவங்கள வந்து நாங்கள் சமாதானப்படுத்துகிறோம். சில பிள்ளைகளுக்கு வந்து வீட்டில் இப்படியான இதுக்கு வந்ததுனால வீட்டில் சில பிரச்சனைகள் ஏற்பட்டு உண்மையாகவே அந்த பிள்ளைகளை வந்து ரொம்ப கொரோனா டைம்லையும் அவங்களுக்கு வந்து வீட்டில் சில அடிகள்லாம் விழுந்திருக்கு. இந்த மாதிரியான வேலைகளுக்கு போகிறீங்க, வீட்டில் வேலைகளை செய்ய மாட்டேங்கிறீங்க. ஆனால் இந்த நாடகத்தை காட்டின பிறகு அம்மா அப்பா தன்னை பற்றி இந்த பிள்ளைகள் எவ்வளவு புரிதல் வச்சுருக்கிறாங்க, தங்கள் மேலே எவ்வளவு பாசம் வச்சுருக்காங்கன்றதை தெரிஞ்சு கொண்டாங்க. அதுக்கு பிறகு இந்த பிள்ளைகள் சொன்னது தான் வந்து இப்போ எனக்கு வீட்டில் வந்து நான் சொல்கிறத அம்மா அப்பா கேட்குறாங்க, எனக்கு வேலைக்கு சாப்பிட்டீங்களான்னு தேடி பார்க்குறாங்க, டிவி பார்க்குறத குறைச்சிட்டு எங்களோட பேசுகிறாங்க. இது ஒரு பெரிய இதாக இருக்குது எங்களுக்கு. நாங்கள் இவ்வளோ நாள் எதிர்பார்த்தது இந்த நாடகம் மூலமாக கிடைச்சிருக்குன்னு அந்த பிள்ளைகள் சொன்னாங்க. அது மட்டும் இல்லாமல் அந்த ஒரு நாடகத்தில் வந்து ஒரு இடத்துல செய்யும்போது அங்கே இருந்த சில இளைஞர்கள் இந்த நாடகத்தை ஊக்குவிக்கணும், இந்த பிள்ளைகளை மறுபடியும் ஊக்குவிக்கணுன்றதுக்காக சில நினைவு பரிசுகளை கொடுத்தாங்க. அந்த பரிசுகளை இதில் நடித்த பிள்ளைகளுடைய அம்மா அப்பாவே கூப்பிட்டு அவங்க அம்மா அப்பா கையாலேயே அந்த பரிசுகளை கொடுத்தாங்க. இது வந்து ஒரு பெரிய ஒரு மனமாற்றத்தை அந்த பிள்ளைகளுக்கு ஏற்படுத்தினது. காரணம் இப்போ இருக்கிற பிள்ளைகளை வந்து நாங்கள் வந்து எந்த இடத்துலையும் வந்து பாராட்டுறதில்லை. அவங்கள வந்து நாங்கள் எந்த நேரமும் ஏசுறது இல்லாட்டி எங்களுடைய சிறுபராயத்தை வச்சுக்கொண்டு இப்போ நாங்கள் அவங்களோட ஒப்பிட்டு பேசுகிறதுமா தான் இருக்குமே தவிர அவங்களுடைய இப்போதைய மனநிலை என்ன அவங்கள அப்படின்னா எந்த இடத்துலையும் அவங்க பாராட்டப்படுறதோ இந்த மாதிரியான விஷயங்கள் குறைவு. அதே மாதிரி இந்த ட்ரைனிங்க்கு வர்ற முதல் அவங்க எப்படி இருந்தாங்கன்னு சொன்னால் அவங்களுடைய இந்த 2 வருட கால பாடசாலை இதெல்லாம் எதுவுமே இல்லாமல் பெரியவர்கள் வீட்டில் இருக்கிற பெரியவர்களுடைய அந்த நடத்தையை அப்படியே பிரதிபலிப்பதாக இருந்தாங்க. அவங்களுடைய அந்த சின்ன வயசுக்குரிய அந்த சுட்டித்தனங்களோ இல்லாட்டி அந்த விளையாட்டு இதுகளோ இல்லாமல் போய் பெரியவர்களுடைய வாழ்க்கையில் இருக்கிற பாதிப்பு நிறைய அந்த பிள்ளைகளுக்கு இருந்தது. அவங்க பேசுகிற விதங்கள், ஒருத்தரோ சந்திச்சா பேசிக்கொள்கிற விதங்கள், அவங்க உரையாடுற தலைப்புகள் இதெல்லாம் வந்து ரொம்ப பாரதூரன்றதை விட அவங்களுடைய வயசை கடந்து அது அவர்களுக்குரியதாக இல்லை. அவங்க ஏதோ வேற ஒரு சட்டையை போட்டுக்கிட்ட மாதிரி இருந்தாங்க எங்களுக்கு. அவங்கள வந்து நாங்கள் முதல்ல அந்த நாடகத்தை பழக்கிறதுக்கு முதல்ல அவங்கள வந்து நாங்கள் ஆற்றுப்படுத்தினோம், அமைதிப்படுத்தினோம். அவங்க மனநிலையை வந்து ஒரு அமைதி சூழலுக்கு கொண்டு வந்தோம். அவங்களுடைய உலகம் என்ன அப்படின்றத அவங்களுக்கு நாங்கள் புரிய வச்சோம். அதுக்கு பிறகு தான் இந்த நாடகங்கள் வந்து பழக்கப்பட்டது. அந்த நாடகங்கள் பழக்கும் பொழுது அந்த பிள்ளைகள் இந்த நாடகம்லாம் நடிக்கும் பொழுது எங்களுக்கு ஒரு இடம் கிடைக்கல, இதை பழகிறதுக்கு ஒரு இடம் கிடைக்கல. மறுபடி நிர்வாகத்துறையிலேருந்து ஏகப்பட்ட பிரச்சனைகள் வந்தது. ஏன் இப்படியான ஒரு நாடகம் திடீர்னு செய்கிறீங்க, இதனால் வந்து மக்களுக்கு என்ன நீங்கள் சொல்ல போகிறீங்க. சில நேரம் மக்கள் வந்து ஏதாவது யோசிக்க தொடங்கிடுவாங்களான்லாம் என்கிட்ட கேட்டாங்க. ஏன்னா அந்த மக்கள் வந்து விழிப்புணர்வு பெற்றுவிட்டால் சில அரசியல் அங்கே நடக்காது. எனவே அதில் கவனமாக இருந்தாங்க. அதனால் எங்களுக்கு வந்து கடைசி வரைக்கும் இந்த பிள்ளைகள் செஞ்ச இந்த நாடகத்தை ஒரு பொது வெளியில் காட்டுறதுக்கு அனுமதி தரவே இல்லை. சரியான மழை, அந்த மழை டைம்லையும் வந்து பார்க்குறதுக்காக தங்களுடைய அம்மா அப்பா எல்லாம் வந்த பிறகு ஒரு இடத்தை தெரிவு செய்கிறதுல நாங்கள் பெரும் கஷ்டப்பட்டோம். அதுக்கு பிறகு ஒரு வழியாக சமாளித்து அந்த பிள்ளைகள் முதலாவதாக ஒரு நாட்சந்தியில் செய்தாங்க. அதுக்கு பிறகு அந்த கோவில் உள்ளுக்கு போகும் பொழுதும் பிரச்சனைகள் வந்தது. அது உடைச்சி கட்டப்பட்டு கொண்டிருக்கிற கோயில், அங்கே போனால் அந்த கோவிலுடைய புனிதம் பாதிக்கப்படும் போன்ற பிரச்சனைகள்லாம் இருந்தது. இதெல்லாம் அந்த பிள்ளைகளுக்கும் எங்களுக்கும் பெரிய ஒரு அழுத்தத்தையும் இந்த கொரோனாவை தாண்டிய பிரச்சனைகளாகவும் இருந்தது. அந்த நாடகம் அந்த ஊரிலே காட்டப்பட்ட பிறகு கிட்டத்தட்ட 9 வருஷத்துக்கு பிறகு அப்படி மக்கள் கூடி அப்படி ஒரு நிகழ்வை கண்டது 9 வருஷத்துக்கு பிறகு அந்த ஊரில் நடந்திருக்கு. இந்த மாதிரி ஒவ்வொரு ஊர்கள்லையும் அந்த கலை விழாக்கள் எல்லாம் இப்போ அருகி வந்து கொண்டிருக்கிற இந்த காலப்பகுதியில் இந்த நாடகம் மறுபடியும் ஒரு அந்த மாதிரியான செயற்பாட்டுக்கு ஒரு எழுச்சியை தூண்டிருக்குதுன்னு தான் சொல்லணும்.
தேங்க்யூ லோகநாதன். நீங்கள் சொன்னது மிகவும் ஒரு பாரதூரமான ஒரு நிகழ்வு. அதாவது முதலாவது பிள்ளைகள் தங்களுடைய இயல்பையே உணராமல் இருந்திருக்கிறாங்க அந்த 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 இடத்துல. அதை நீங்கள் உங்களோட நாடகத்தால் அவங்கள மறுபடி பிள்ளைகளாக்கி இருக்கிறீங்க. அப்போ நீங்கள் பிள்ளைகளே எழுவீரன்னு சொன்னது மிக பொருத்தம் அதுக்கு. அதோட பிள்ளைகளுக்கும் தகப்பன்மாருக்கும் உள்ள உறவை நீங்கள் பலப்படுத்தி இருக்கிறீங்க. அப்போ இந்த 2 வகையில் இந்த நாடகம் உங்களுக்கு ஒரு வெற்றி என்று தான் சொல்ல வேணும். அதோடு மாத்திரமில்லை, அவங்களுக்கு அங்கே அந்த கோயிலுக்குள்ளே போய் நாடகம் வைக்க முடியாமல் போனது எல்லாம் பெரிய ஒரு மனத்துக்கு பெரிய தாக்கமாக இருந்திருக்கும். ஆனால் அந்த பிள்ளைகள் அதையும் தாண்டி இவ்வளவு அழகாக இந்த நாடகத்தை செய்திருக்கிறாங்க. அதுக்கு நீங்கள் உதவி செய்திருக்கிறீங்க. அது மிகப்பெரிய ஒரு சாதனைன்னு தான் சொல்ல வேணும். ஆனால் இந்த மாதிரியான நாடகங்கள் நீங்கள் இன்னும் தொடர்ந்து செய்வீர்களா அல்லது இதோடு நிறுத்தி கொள்வீர்களா? ஏனென்றால் லாக்டவுனுக்காகத்தான் செய்தீங்களா, இல்லாட்டில் இது உங்களுடைய வழக்கமான ஒரு நிகழ்ச்சி நிரலில் அமைக்கப்படுமான்றது தான் என்னுடைய கேள்வி.
நிச்சயமாக நாங்கள் உண்மையாகவே வந்து கடந்த 17 வருடமாக இந்த நாடகத்துறையில் இருந்து வரோம். நாங்கள் ஒரு பெரிய நிறுவனத்தில் இருந்து வேலை செய்தோம். பிறகு நாங்கள் எங்களுடைய மக்கள் இருக்கின்ற அந்த வாழ்வியலுக்குள்ளே சென்று இந்த நாடகத்தை செய்யணும்னு சொல்லி விருப்பப்பட்டு அதற்கான ஏற்பாடுகளை செய்யும் பொழுது தான் இந்த ஒரு செயற்திட்டமும் எங்களுக்கு வந்தது. எனவே நாங்கள் அதை பயன்படுத்தி கொண்டோம். ஏன்னா எங்களுக்கு அவ்வளவு பெரிய வளங்களோ பொருளாதார வளமோ இல்லாத பின்னணியில் இருக்கின்ற பொழுது இதை நாங்கள் பயன்படுத்தி கொண்டோம் ஒரு எங்கள் எல்லாருக்குமான ஒரு எழுச்சியாக. எனவே அந்த பிள்ளைகளை நாங்கள் இனி தொடர்ந்து எங்களுடையே வச்சிருந்து இன்னும் பல நாடகங்களை செய்கிறதுக்கு நாங்கள் முயற்சிகளை செய்வோம். அதுக்காக அந்த பிள்ளைகளும் இப்போது தயாராக இருக்கிறாங்க. அதே மாதிரி தொடர்ந்து இப்போ இந்த நாடகங்களை ஒரு இடத்துல இருந்து இன்னொரு இடத்துக்கு, அதே மாதிரி ஒரு தோட்டத்தில் இருந்து இன்னொரு தோட்டத்துக்கு கொண்டு போய் நாங்கள் காண்பிச்சிருக்கிறோம் இந்த கடந்த காலங்களில். அதே மாதிரி பாடசாலை ஆசிரியர்கள், அதிபர்கள் அவர்களை கூப்பிட்டும் காமிச்சிருக்கிறோம். இதுக்கு பிறகு இந்த நாடகத்தில் ஒவ்வொரு பாடசாலையிலையும் ஜனவரி மாதம் தொடக்கம் அரங்கேற்றுவதற்கு நாங்கள் கதைச்சி கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். அதை தவிர்த்து இன்னும் பிற செயற்பாடு, அந்த மாணவர்களோடு இணைந்து ஒரு குழுவாக இருந்து ஒரு 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 உலக திரைப்படங்களை பார்ப்பது, அதே மாதிரியான எங்களுடைய நாட்டுப்புற கலைகளை பற்றி அவர்களோடு கலந்துரையாடுவது, அந்த பெரியவர்களோடு அந்த நாட்டுப்புற கலைஞர்களோடு அவர்களை பழக விடுவது போன்ற பல செயற்திட்டங்களை அடுத்து செய்கிறதுக்கு நாங்கள் எங்களுடைய குழுவில் இப்பொழுது ஆயத்தப்படுத்தல்களில் ஈடுபட்டிருக்கோம்.
மிக்க மகிழ்ச்சி. உங்களுக்கு வேறு ஏதாவது சொல்ல வேண்டுமா? இல்லாட்டில் நாங்கள் இதை இத்தோடு முடிவுக்கு கொண்டு வரலாம்.
இல்லை, இந்த பிள்ளைகளே எழுவீர் என்ற இந்த நாடகத்தில் நடித்த அந்த பிள்ளைகள் இன்றைக்கு எல்லாரும் ஒன்று சேர்ந்து ஒரு இடத்துல பார்த்துருக்குறாங்க லைவாக. அந்த பிள்ளைகளுடைய சந்தோஷத்தை ஒரு மீட்டு கொடுப்பதுக்கு நாங்கள் ஒரு கருவியாக செயல்பட்டுருக்கிறோம். அதே மாதிரி இன்றைக்கி இங்கே கதைச்ச நிறைய பேர் இந்த நலிவுற்ற மக்களுடைய வாழ்வியலை எடுத்துக்கொண்டு பார்த்தா எல்லாருக்குமே ஒரு ஒற்றுமை இருக்கிறது. இந்த மக்கள் எல்லாருமே ஒன்றிணைஞ்சிருக்கிறாங்க. ஆனால் அவர்களுக்கு இடையில் தொடர்புகள் துண்டிக்கப்பட்டிருக்குது. இப்போ மலையகத்தை எடுத்துக்கொண்டாலும் இப்போ இந்த அடுக்குமாடி தொடர்கள் இப்படி இருக்குது, மலையகத்தில் வீடுகள் இப்படி இருக்குது. எனவே இங்கேயும் ஒரு சுவர் தான் அவங்கள பிரிக்குது. ஆனால் அந்த சுவர் சீன சுவர் மாதிரி பெரிய சுவராக அவங்களுக்கு இடையில் எழுந்து போச்சு. முந்தி இருந்த அந்த சமூக அமைப்பு, சமூகத்தினுடைய மீது இருந்த கரிசனை, சமூகத்தின் மீது இருந்த பற்று, அந்த ஒரு குழு ஒற்றுமை என்பது இப்பொழுது சில காரணிகளால் திட்டமிட்டு அது உடைக்கப்பட்டிருக்கிறது. அந்த தொடர்பு பிரிக்கப்பட்டிருக்கிறது. ஏன்னா நாங்கள் இந்த மாணவர்கள் ஊடாக இந்த நாடகத்தின் ஊடாக நாங்கள் எதிர்பார்ப்பது இந்த மாதிரி சின்ன சின்ன, அதாவது அடுத்த தலைமுறையினுடைய வருகை, அவர்களுடைய வாழ்வியல், அந்த கூட்டு வாழ்வியலை மீள கொண்டு வருவதாகவும் சமூகத்தின் மீது இருக்கின்ற அக்கறையை அவர்கள் உணர்ந்து கொள்வதாகவும் இருக்க வேண்டும் என்ற அடிப்படையில் சில வேலை திட்டங்களை முன்வைக்கின்றோம். எனவே இதை பார்த்து கொண்டிருக்கின்றவர்கள் எங்களோடு இணைந்து செயல்படுவதற்கு விருப்பமாக இருந்தால் எங்களை தொடர்பு கொள்ளலாம்.
மிக்க நன்றி.
நன்றி.
If you could give a small recap just for the benefit of the panelists, because our audience has live interpretation, but
right.
Just, yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that was a very informative and a very powerful presentation by Rasaya Loganathan, where he presented the process of making that piece of artwork with the children, where the children had the entire scope to design it and do it the way they wanted. So, I mean, probably there was a guiding kind of a framework around them, but everything was produced by them. And what was important is that by involving the children, they were able to shed their assumed roles as adults because of their vulnerabilities and become children again. I think this is a very important contribution the play has made, because when people are put in vulnerable situations, they tend to act like adults, trying to deal with the challenges. Whereas this play actually made them realize you are actually children. You have to behave and you know, romp around and make fun like children do. So they were able to get back into their child modes, as it were, and produce this. And the play also actually made it possible for the children to communicate with the parents better. Because when the children showed the issues that the parents faced, the parents themselves realized how these children actually understood the struggles that they are going through. And so they were able to have a better relationship with the children, and the children felt that they are being listened to more by the parents now than before they started doing the play. And there were other issues with this play that came about because of the political forces in the area saw this as an empowerment of the group, and they were not very happy with it. And they said, you know, if you're doing it inside, don't show it to other people. But they had managed to circumvent all the obstacles that were presented. And they're able to take it around and show it in schools around. And there were other issues with taking to areas where like in a temple ground, where these communities were seen as unclean, shall we say, or not, or whatever, so that they were not allowed to go into the temple grounds to show this. So there were several issues that surfaced, and my question to him was that there is political sort of disapproval of this, and there is also other infrastructure and institutional problems. Would you continue to do it? He said, yes, that's my job, and I will continue to be a theater producer, and that we will always continue with this work, and we hope to see it through even after the lockdowns are finished. This is not lockdown specific, and what I find is that there is a kind of commonality between the UDA children, in the high rises, and although it is vertical, UDA's housing, ours is horizontal, but there is a lot of commonalities between us. But I feel that this commonality and our cooperation or working together has been systematically disrupted now by the COVID and the lockdowns. And we need to find ways of circumventing these difficulties, and we hope that there will be some support or help from anyone who is sympathetic with these ideas. Correct? Okay.
Thank you so much. And just one last question about if there were how the children emotionally coped with the creative process to Malin for departures.
Sorry, we didn't hear the question properly.
How the children emotionally coped with the creative process to Malin about departures.
Yeah, so before I start, I just want to let everyone know I'm standing in for Irfan, who is currently struggling with a lot of medical complications brought on by COVID, and also the stress of the last couple of months trying to get him and his family back to Pakistan. So, and also I also just want to say I was really blown away by Loga and Leela's production, and personally would like to really thank them for providing a voice to this like truly voiceless community. I'm sure the production was meant a lot for those kids, and I also found Umesh's talk really illuminating, and the work Ruki, Vasuki and Avanka are doing are really important, and I can't imagine how much more difficult it has been with COVID. In terms of answering the question about departures, I think there's a lot of similarities to what Avanka was talking about, how the kids were dealing with the police brutality. They were talking. She was talking about how they were looking at it like a game of horror police, right? And very similarly, on one side we had Irfan's story, which was the adult perspective of their circumstances, but then when Isabel and Lucky were talking about their memories around coming to Sri Lanka and the last couple of years, it was coming from a place similar to what Avanka is talking about, basically from a place of innocence and childhood. And like, for example, when they first came to Sri Lanka, they were so excited to get on a plane and be at the airport and things like that. But then on the flip side of that, I think these circumstances also, whether it's kids in the estates or low-income homes or asylum-seeking kids, also forces them to, those circumstances are a real onslaught to their childhood. It really forces a lot of them to, grow up and lose their childhood really quickly. And so while they were, showing their innocence and childishness, there was also, randomly they would say really wise things, and we captured a few of them in our recordings where, for example, I think there's a point where when they had to leave their homes, they were talking about how, like it was okay because, you can never expect things to always go according to plan. And that's how they kind of, dealt with that having to leave. And that's essentially a statement on like managing expectations, right? Which is something even adults are pretty bad at. So on one side, like there's this massive onslaught on their childhood, and there's this, they're forced to grow up before they really shouldn't. And on the other end, there's that real resilience of their childhood and that innocence that's still preserved, and that's kind of what we wanted to capture in our film. And really, I think Lucky and Isabel, through the creative process and their honesty and being completely open to telling their story from their perspective, really helped us bring that out, I think. And at the same time, I think it was really nice, not just for them, for us also, while we were working on the project, because we could see, them lighting up every time, we were going through the production process of this. So, like I think there's a lot of talk between like, the importance of humanitarian help versus engaging in art and creativity and things like that. And I think we really need to do both, right? Especially when it comes to kids. And it's not an either or situation, and we don't have to triage and pick. And if we are forced to do that, it just means that we need to do a better job. We need to rise up to the challenge and try our best to not only help these kids in terms of humanitarian efforts, but also help them, engage in their creativity and help them through dealing with some of these traumas. So I think the panelists, everyone here, are really doing an amazing job in that and tackling these issues in different perspectives. So I wish all of them the best, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm excited to see where everyone's work takes them.
Thank you, Malin. I have a question about the production, and also with reference to what Avanka was saying. Even in these situations, although children are vulnerable, they have their strength, the strength of both Lucky and Isabel during your production. What was their contribution?
Absolutely. So when we were discussing what to do with their story, we were first just talking to them, right? We were just listening to their memories around coming to Sri Lanka, and our original idea was to write a script and shoot a short film. But then when we were just listening to them talking, we thought it was far more interesting to just let them speak and just capture that audio and then create the experience that we created. Because I think that the honesty really comes across there, and the bravery to recount all those experiences and those memories. I think, like, especially if you rewatch the section about the Easter bombings, you could actually hear Isabel break down while she's talking about it, which was like difficult for us as well, because we didn't want to push her to that space, right? And so it was honestly really brave of them to actually talk about it and share their experiences. And I like, which is why we ended up just taking the actual raw recordings that we had from their conversations and then creating this piece around them. So really, this entire piece is due to their, complete honesty and bravery and their resilience in talking about these issues.
Thank you so much. Well, that has brought us to the end of this program on children under lockdown, vulnerable children in lockdown. And what is so life-giving or inspiring or exhilarating is that all of the contributions made by the children have been actually brought out so beautifully, whether it be art, whether it be the short film, or the drama that was done with the children in Bhagwantalava. We have actually made most of the strength of the children. And this is very, very significant. And we really have to thank Ruanti and her team for this excellent, wonderful presentation and this work and all of that has been done towards the children here. And finally, let me thank my panelists, Ruki, Avanka, Umeshi, and Rasaya Loganathan, for being here and being such a sport in getting this through with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
That was a very in-depth discussion of the many aspects that have caused children to be vulnerable during the pandemic. A sincere thank you to our panel and our artists for sharing your research, your stories, and insights on the varying concerns and solutions in relation to this topic. While I was listening to the discussion, I felt the very root of the solution or change seemed to be that it needs to start in the thinking, whether it be in policymaking or societal or cultural conditioning. And another thing that was obvious is that all these topics in discussion that our panels are going to be focusing on are definitely interconnected. So 2 of those topics were covered yesterday. That was in the well-being of your mental health and your health, your physical health, as well as abuse. And since it was touched on upon the digital well-being in this discussion, I would just like to say that there will be a panel discussion tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And if this is something that interests you, please do join us for that discussion tomorrow. This wraps up our morning session, but we still have more to come. So for those of you who have signed up for our teachers workshop, that is going to commence at 1:30 p.m. So please follow the link that you have been emailed, or you can go onto the main page at www.stages.lk to find your link there. And we are only halfway through our day. And we have a very exciting 4th session planned for you, where all of our artists are going to be children. So we have a reading and a Zoom film in store for you, along with an artist discussion as well as another panel discussion. So please join us again at 3 p.m. at this location. See you then.